I sat in the back row of Harvard's graduation ceremony, watching my sister Claire cross the stage in her cap and gown, while our parents beamed with pride from the front. That morning at brunch, Dad had announced Claire would inherit everything: the $20 million Manhattan townhouse, the BMW, the investment portfolio. I'd excused myself to cry in the bathroom. Now an elderly man in an expensive suit approached my seat, handed me a thick manila envelope and whispered, "Now's the time to show them who you really are," then disappeared into the crowd before I could ask questions. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope during the commencement speech. Nobody around me noticed. They were all watching Claire, the golden child, the Harvard graduate destined for greatness. Meanwhile, I was Anya, the disappointment, the one who barely graduated from a state school with a degree nobody cared about. Inside the envelope were legal documents, old photographs, and a birth certificate I'd never seen before. The papers felt heavy in my lap, important, in a way I couldn't yet understand. I squinted at the text, trying to make sense of the formal legal language, while the speaker droned on about future leaders and bright tomorrows. The documents revealed something impossible. I was the biological daughter of a man named Marcus Hartley, a tech billionaire who had died when I was 6 months old, my mother's first husband. The birth certificate showed a different last name than the one I'd used my entire life. According to the trust documents, Marcus Hartley had left his entire estate to me, worth $47 million, accessible when I turned 30. I had just turned 30 last month. My current parents, Margaret and Douglas, were listed as temporary guardians after Marcus died. But there was more. A letter from Marcus, handwritten on expensive stationery, explained that he wanted me to have everything. He wanted me to build my own path, to have opportunities, to know I was loved and valued. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Suddenly, vague memories flooded back. A different house with tall windows and bright rooms. A man's laugh, warm and kind. A feeling of safety I hadn't experienced since childhood. Before age 6, before everything changed, before I became the dumb one, the burden, the mistake. Now I understood why my parents had always treated me differently than Claire. She was their biological daughter, born 2 years after they took me in. She was the real child. I was just the obligation, the inconvenient reminder of my mother's first marriage. But what they'd never told me was that I came with $47 million attached. The ceremony ended. Graduates tossed their caps into the air. Families rushed forward to take photographs and offer congratulations. I sat frozen, clutching the documents, trying to process what this meant. Had my parents known about this inheritance my whole life? Had they deliberately kept it from me? I stood on shaky legs and made my way through the crowd toward where my parents stood with Claire, surrounded by her friends and professors. My mother wore a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. My father's watch gleamed in the sunlight, the kind of watch you see in magazine advertisements aimed at successful men. They didn't notice me approach. They were too busy accepting congratulations, basking in Claire's reflected glory. I waited at the edge of their circle, invisible as always, until there was a break in the conversation. "Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you." My voice came out smaller than I intended. My father glanced at me with irritation. "Anya, we're in the middle of something. Can't this wait?" "No." I held up the envelope. "It can't wait. I need you to explain these." I pulled out the documents and spread them in front of them. Birth certificate, trust papers, Marcus Hartley's letter. For a moment, nobody spoke. The celebration continued around us, but our little group had gone silent. My mother's face went pale. My father's jaw tightened. They exchanged a look that confirmed everything. They had known. They had always known. "Where did you get those?" my mother asked quietly. "Someone gave them to me. But that's not the point. The point is that you've been lying to me for 30 years. Marcus Hartley was my father. He left me a trust fund worth $47 million. And you never told me. I expected denial. I expected excuses. I expected them to say this was all a misunderstanding, that they were about to tell me that there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. Instead, my father smiled. It was a cold smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "You think we didn't know. He crossed his arms. We've been managing that trust for 24 years, sweetheart. Every investment decision, every account transfer. You really think you'll just walk in and take it? The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. My mother stepped closer, her voice low and venomous. Marcus was a fool. You're a fool. That money funded Claire's education, our lifestyle, everything. It's already ours. They turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in my clearance rack dress among Harvard's elite, surrounded by happy families, celebrating their children's accomplishments. Claire lingered for a moment, a smirk on her perfect face. Thanks for the trust fund, sis, she whispered, then followed our parents. I stood there clutching the documents, my entire world tilting on its axis. They'd stolen from me. For 24 years, they'd stolen my inheritance and used it to fund their lives while treating me like I was worthless, while calling me the dumb one, while making me believe I'd never amount to anything. Rage hardened inside my chest, hot and fierce. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I needed a lawyer. First thing Monday morning, I would find the best attorney in Manhattan and fight for what was mine. Monday arrived with gray skies and the promise of rain. I called in sick to my administrative job at a small marketing firm where I made $42,000 a year, barely enough to cover rent on my studio apartment in Queens. My boss sounded annoyed, but I didn't care. For the first time in my life, something more important than keeping a job I hated was at stake. I'd spent the weekend researching estate lawyers. Harold Brennan had impressive credentials, a corner office overlooking Central Park, and a reputation for winning cases against powerful families. His consultation fee was $500. I put it on my credit card and tried not to think about how I'd pay it off. Brennan's office building had marble floors and a doorman who looked at my discount store clothes with barely concealed disdain. The elevator played soft classical music as it carried me to the 40th floor. Everything about the place screamed money and power, two things I'd never had. The receptionist led me to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that probably cost more than my car. Harold Brennan entered a few minutes later, a silver-haired man in his 60s wearing a suit that fit like it had been made specifically for his body. It probably had been. "Miss Hartley," he said, shaking my hand with a firm grip. "Tell me about your situation." I spread the documents across his mahogany table and explained everything. My biological father's death, the trust fund, my parents' admission that they'd been managing it for decades, the $47 million that should have been mine. Brennan examined the papers, carefully, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. His face remained neutral, giving nothing away. When I finished talking, he looked up at me. "This is a strong case," he said. "Very strong. Your parents were named as guardians with fiduciary duty. That means they were legally obligated to manage the trust in your best interest, not their own. If they used trust funds for personal expenses, that's a clear breach. We can recover the money, possibly with damages." Hope flared in my chest. "So you'll take the case?" "My retainer is $50,000. The hope flickered and died. I didn't have $50,000. I didn't have $5,000. I had about $800 in my checking account and maxed out credit cards. Brennan must have seen the despair on my face. "We can work out a payment plan. Given the size of the trust, I'm confident we'll recover enough to cover legal fees and still leave you with substantial assets." We spent the next hour going over details. Brennan explained trust law, fiduciary duty, and the legal process ahead. He made it sound straightforward, almost easy. We'd file an emergency petition to freeze the trust accounts so my parents couldn't hide any remaining money. We'd schedule a hearing. We'd present evidence of mismanagement. The judge would rule in my favor. I signed the retainer agreement with shaking hands, committing to a payment plan that terrified me but seemed worth the risk. Brennan assured me he'd have the petition filed by end of day. A court date would be scheduled within 2 weeks. As I left his office, I felt lighter than I had in years. Someone believed me. Someone with power and credentials was on my side. Maybe finally justice would prevail. The next week passed in a blur of anxious waiting. Brennan's assistant called to confirm the court date 2 weeks from Thursday. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting to fantasies of my new life. I'd pay off my student loans, maybe go back to school, travel, help other people in similar situations. The possibilities felt endless. On Tuesday evening, I came home from work to find 2 police officers and a woman in a gray pantsuit standing outside my apartment building. My heart dropped into my stomach. Anya Hartley, one of the officers, asked. Yes, we have a court order for psychiatric evaluation. The woman stepped forward, introducing herself as a social worker. She explained in a tone that sounded both sympathetic and firm that my parents had filed an emergency petition. They claimed I was experiencing a psychotic break, that I'd fabricated a fantasy about a secret inheritance, that I was harassing them and showing signs of dangerous mental instability. This is insane, I said, my voice rising. They're lying. I have proof. I have documents. The court takes these matters very seriously, the social worker said. Your parents have provided evidence of concerning behavior, a history of depression, financial struggles, estrangement from family members. These are all indicators that support their petition. I saw a therapist for 3 months after college. That doesn't make me crazy, and I'm not estranged. They abandoned me, but nobody was listening. The court order was clear. I had to report for psychiatric evaluation the next morning at 9, or the police would escort me. I could choose to go voluntarily or be taken into custody. I barely slept that night. The walls of my tiny apartment seemed to close in around me. My parents had anticipated my move and struck back. They were painting me as mentally ill to discredit my claims. It was brilliant and terrifying in equal measure. The psychiatric evaluation took place in a sterile office building in Midtown. The evaluator, Dr. Patricia Weston, was a stern woman with gray hair pulled into a tight bun. She looked at me over her glasses like I was a specimen to be studied. I tried to explain the truth, showed her the documents from the envelope, told her about the trust fund, about my parents' admission about Harold Brennan taking my case. Dr. Weston listened without expression. When I finished, she set down her pen and folded her hands on her desk. Delusions often seem very real to the patient, she said. These documents could be forged. Your parents are concerned about you, which suggests they care deeply for your well-being. Have you considered that you might be experiencing a mental health crisis? I'm not crazy. The words came out too loud, too desperate. I could hear how I sounded, and it wasn't good. Nobody is using that word, Dr. Weston said calmly. But your parents have expressed legitimate concerns. Given your history and current circumstances, I'm recommending a 72-hour hold for observation. The room spun. You can't do that. I can, and I am. It's for your own safety. Within an hour, I was transported to a psychiatric facility in Westchester. They took my phone, locked away my personal belongings, and gave me a hospital gown. I was assigned to a shared room with 3 other women, the door locked from the outside. I lay on the narrow bed that first night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. My parents had turned the system against me. They'd made me look unstable, dangerous, delusional. And worst of all, when I'd called Brennan's office from the facility phone, his receptionist said he'd withdrawn from my case and refunded my retainer. They'd gotten to him, paid him off, or threatened him. I was alone. In the bed across from mine, one of my roommates mumbled in her sleep. Somewhere down the hall, someone screamed. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, never fully dark, even at night. I had to prove I was sane. I had to get out of here. I had to find a lawyer who wouldn't betray me. And then I had to make my parents pay for what they'd done. The psychiatric facility operated on a rigid schedule. Wake up at 6:30. Breakfast in the common room at 7. Group therapy at 9. Individual sessions in the afternoon. Medication distribution at 8 in the evening. Lights out at 10. I followed every rule. Spoke calmly to every staff member. Participated in group therapy without mentioning my family situation or the trust fund. When other patients talked about their delusions, I listened sympathetically and offered generic support. Dr. Raymond Cole, the facility psychiatrist, met with me daily. He was younger than Dr. Weston, with kind eyes and a gentle manner. During our third session, I decided to risk telling him a simplified version of the truth. "I'm here because of a family disagreement," I said carefully. "An estate matter. I have legitimate legal documents that prove my claim, but my parents are wealthy and well-connected. They overreacted to my attempt to assert my rights." Dr. Cole asked to see the documents. I'd hidden them in my sock before intake folded into a small square. He examined them closely, asked questions about dates and details, and listened to my answers. "These look authentic," he said finally, "and you seem completely lucid and rational to me. Tell me about your relationship with your parents." I told him everything, keeping my voice steady and my emotions controlled. The years of being called stupid, the constant comparisons to Claire, the way they'd announced her inheritance at breakfast like I wasn't even in the room, the envelope at graduation, their admission that they'd stolen my money. Dr. Cole took extensive notes. After our session, he spent 2 more days observing me, talking to me, evaluating my mental state. On the morning of the third day, he called me into his office. "I'm releasing you," he said. "I see no evidence of mental illness, no signs of psychosis or delusional thinking. Your situation appears to be a civil legal matter that your family is attempting to resolve through inappropriate use of the psychiatric system. I'm noting all of this in my evaluation and recommending no further psychiatric intervention." Relief washed over me so intensely that I started crying. Dr. Cole handed me a box of tissues and waited patiently for me to compose myself. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for believing me." "I believe the evidence," he said, "and I believe you deserve proper legal representation. I'm going to give you a referral." He wrote down a name and phone number: Jenna Sutton, Legal Aid Society. Jenna specialized in estate fraud cases through a nonprofit organization. She took cases pro bono for people who couldn't afford private attorneys. I left the facility that afternoon, blinking in the bright sunlight, feeling like I'd escaped from prison. The first thing I did was call Jenna Sutton. She agreed to meet me the next day at a coffee shop in Brooklyn. Jenna was younger than I expected, maybe 28 or 29, with dark hair pulled into a ponytail and an intensity that radiated from her like heat. She'd graduated from Harvard Law 3 years ago, she told me, and had dedicated her career to helping people who'd been victimized by family members. I showed her the documents. She spread them across the sticky coffee shop table and studied each one, occasionally pulling out her laptop to cross-reference information or look up legal precedents. "This is the most clear-cut case I've ever seen," she said, finally looking up at me with fierce determination. "Your parents committed massive fiduciary breach. We're going to destroy them." Over the next 2 weeks, Jenna worked like a woman possessed. She filed motions, subpoenaed records, and requested an expedited hearing. The trust account records arrived via court order, page after page, documenting 24 years of unauthorized withdrawals totaling $31 million. Wire transfers to pay for the Manhattan townhouse, payments for Claire's private school, summer camps, college tuition, luxury vacations, cars, art, jewelry. They'd spent my inheritance on themselves while making me feel like a worthless burden. "We have them," Jenna said, tapping the account statements. "This evidence is irrefutable. No judge will side with them after seeing this." The court hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks away. I started letting myself believe that I might actually win. I reconnected with my college friend Emma, who offered to let me stay with her if I lost my apartment. I looked at online courses, thinking about going back to school. I imagined a future where I wasn't drowning in debt and shame. The night before the hearing, my phone rang at 11. Jenna's name appeared on the screen. I answered, expecting her to say something reassuring about tomorrow. Instead, her voice shook. "Anya, we have a massive problem." My stomach dropped. "What happened?" "Your parents' legal team just filed counter evidence. They have documents showing you signed authorization forms over the years. Forms approving all the withdrawals from the trust. They're claiming you were a willing participant, that you knew about the trust and agreed to let them manage it. That's impossible. I never signed anything. I didn't even know about the trust until 3 weeks ago." "I know, but these forms are dated. From when you were 18, 21, 25, 28. The signatures look exactly like your handwriting." They've also produced emails allegedly from you thanking your parents for managing the family money and being generous. I paced my tiny apartment, panic rising in my throat. I never wrote those emails. I never signed those forms. This is forgery. I believe you. But proving forgery is incredibly difficult. They've been planning this for years, Anya. They anticipated you might discover the truth eventually, so they created a paper trail to protect themselves. What does this mean for our case? Jenna was quiet for a long moment. It means instead of a clear-cut fraud case, we now have a he-said, she-said situation. It becomes your word against theirs, and they have documentation. Can't we get the documents analyzed? Prove they're fake? Forensic document analysis takes months and costs tens of thousands of dollars. The judge would have to approve it, and without preliminary evidence of forgery, he's unlikely to authorize that expense. So what do? We go to court tomorrow and fight as hard as we can. But Anya, I need you to prepare yourself. This just became a much harder case to win. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my apartment floor back against the wall, watching the hours tick by. Everything I'd hoped for was slipping away. My parents had thought of everything. They'd created fake documents, forged my signature, manufactured evidence. They were 10 steps ahead, and I was stumbling to keep up. But giving up wasn't an option. I'd come too far. They'd put me in a psychiatric facility. They'd stolen my inheritance and my childhood and my sense of self-worth. If I gave up now, they won forever. At dawn, I showered and put on the only professional outfit I owned, a black dress I'd bought for job interviews 5 years ago. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Thinner, older, tired, but still standing. I would walk into that courtroom. I would tell the truth. And I would make them see who the real criminals were. Manhattan Surrogates Court had the solemn atmosphere of a place where important decisions happened. High ceilings, dark wood paneling, rows of benches that looked like church pews. I sat next to Jenna at the plaintiff's table, my hands folded in my lap to keep them from shaking. Across the aisle, my parents sat with their legal team from Winston & Chase, one of the most prestigious firms in the city. 3 attorneys in tailored suits flanked my mother and father. The lead attorney was Catherine Whitmore, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and an expression that suggested she'd never lost a case she cared about. Judge Martin Castellano entered, and we all stood. He was an older man with deep-set eyes and a reputation for being brilliant but harsh. He didn't tolerate nonsense in his courtroom. Jenna and I looked outmatched. A young nonprofit lawyer in a department store suit, a plaintiff in a 5-year-old dress, against the combined might of wealth and power. Catherine Whitmore presented her case first. She spoke with calm authority, painting a picture of devoted guardians who'd taken in a troubled child and managed her trust fund responsibly for decades. She displayed the forged authorization documents, one by one on a screen, each form bearing my supposedly authentic signature. As you can see, Your Honor, Miss Hartley was fully aware of the trust and participated actively in financial decisions. These signatures spanned 12 years. She approved expenditures. She thanked her parents repeatedly for their guidance. Whitmore called a handwriting expert, who testified that the signatures were genuine, that the pressure points and letter formations matched authenticated samples of my handwriting. The expert spoke with scientific certainty, using terms I didn't understand, making it sound like absolute proof. Then came the emails. Whitmore projected them on the screen messages, allegedly sent from my email address. Thank you for managing everything so well. I don't know what I'd do without your financial guidance. Please use whatever you need from the trust. Each email felt like a knife. They were lies, complete fabrications, but they looked real. Timestamps, email headers, everything perfectly constructed. Whitmore called character witnesses next. A family friend named Gregory Walsh testified that I'd always been aware and involved in financial discussions, that I'd seemed grateful for my parents' management, that I'd never expressed confusion or concern about the trust until recently. When it was my turn to testify, Jenna walked me through my story. I explained the envelope at graduation, the discovery of documents I'd never seen before, My 30 years of believing I was just their daughter, not knowing about Marcus Hartley or the trust fund. The years of being called stupid, worthless, the dumb one. I spoke clearly and honestly, making eye contact with the judge, trying to convey the truth of what had happened. Then Catherine Whitmore stood for cross-examination, and everything fell apart. Miss Hartley, isn't it true that you were recently held for psychiatric evaluation? Yes, but... And that evaluation was prompted by concerns about your mental stability. My parents filed a false petition to discredit me. Or perhaps they filed a legitimate petition because you were experiencing a mental health crisis. Whitmore's voice dripped with false concern. Isn't it possible that you've constructed this fantasy about a secret inheritance? Because you're struggling financially and emotionally? No, that's not. You make $42,000 a year, correct? Yes. You have significant student loan debt. Yes. Credit card debt. Yes. So you're drowning in debt, watching your sister succeed, and suddenly you discover a $47 million trust fund that conveniently makes you the victim and your parents the villains. Isn't that rather convenient? They admitted it. My voice came out too loud. At graduation, they admitted they'd been managing the trust. Or is that what you remember them saying? Can anyone else verify this conversation? I looked at Jenna desperately. We had no witnesses. It had been just us and my family members, and none of them would corroborate my version. Whitmore continued, methodically destroying my credibility. She brought up every mistake I'd ever made, every sign of instability, every reason to doubt me. By the time she finished, I felt small and foolish, exactly the way my parents had always made me feel. Jenna tried to salvage the case. She presented evidence of the unauthorized withdrawals, the $31 million spent over 24 years. But Whitmore countered that every withdrawal was authorized by me, as the documents proved. Jenna requested forensic analysis of the signatures and emails. Judge Castellano denied it. That would be expensive and time-consuming. I need preliminary evidence of forgery to justify such an expenditure, and I don't see sufficient evidence. The hearing lasted 7 hours. By the end, I knew we'd lost. Judge Castellano took only 20 minutes to reach his decision. He found no evidence of fraud or breach of fiduciary duty. The authorization documents appeared credible. My testimony was undermined by my recent psychiatric hold and my obvious financial desperation. He dismissed my petition entirely. Then it got worse. Furthermore, the judge said, I find that this action was brought without reasonable basis and has caused significant expense to the defendants. Ms. Hartley is ordered to pay opposing counsel's fees in the amount of $87,000. She has 30 days to make payment or face wage garnishment. The courtroom spun. $87,000. I didn't have $8,700. As we left the courthouse, Catherine Whitmore handed Jenna additional documents with a smile that looked more like a baring of teeth. Your client should know that we're filing a defamation suit. Her false accusations have damaged my client's reputation. We're seeking $2 million in damages. She'll be served within the week. Jenna took the documents silently. Her face had gone pale. We're also filing a bar complaint against you, Whitmore added, turning to Jenna. For bringing a frivolous lawsuit. You should have vetted your client's claims more carefully. On the subway back to Queens, I couldn't speak. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on me like physical force. I owed $87,000 with no way to pay. My wages would be garnished, leaving me unable to afford rent or food. A $2 million defamation suit was coming. Jenna might lose her law license for trying to help me. My parents had won. Completely, utterly, devastatingly won. That evening, I checked my bank account, $743. I'd already received an eviction notice for late rent. My landlord had been patient, but patience had limits. I sat on the floor of my apartment and cried until I had no tears left. Then I just sat there numb and hollow, staring at nothing. Emma came over when I didn't answer her texts. She found me still sitting on the floor in the dark. Anya, she said gently, kneeling beside me. I'm so sorry. They destroyed me, I whispered. They thought of everything. The fake documents, the witnesses, the legal team. I never had a chance. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What if the signatures really are forged? What if we can prove it another way?" I looked at her. "The judge won't authorize analysis. It's over. I work in tech. Remember, I know someone who does digital forensics. Maybe we can trace those emails, prove they're fake. And what about your parents' finances? What if they're hiding other secrets? What if there's something bigger we can expose?" A tiny spark of something, maybe hope, maybe just stubbornness, flickered in my chest. I have nothing left to lose. Exactly. So let's find out what they're really hiding. If they went to this much trouble to frame you, they must be protecting something more than just stolen money. I thought about it. My parents had been desperate to discredit me, to paint me as crazy and vindictive. They'd created years of fake documentation. They'd hired the best lawyers money could buy. They'd been willing to put me in a psychiatric facility. People didn't do that, unless they had something truly terrible to hide. I stood up, wiped my face, and looked at Emma. If they want to destroy me, I'm taking them down with me. Let's find out what they're really hiding. Emma's contact was a cybersecurity expert named Tyler Morgan. He worked from a cluttered office in a building in Williamsburg, surrounded by monitors and computer equipment that blinked and hummed. He had the focused intensity of someone who saw the world in code. "Emma says you need help proving email fraud," Tyler said, barely looking up from his screen. I explained the situation. Tyler listened while his fingers flew across the keyboard, already working. Within 48 hours, he called me back. "Your emails were fabricated," he said. "I traced the IP addresses. They were sent from your email account, but they originated from a computer at your parents' home address. Someone accessed your account using a compromised password and created these messages. I can prove it. Can you testify to this in court?" "Absolutely. I've got documentation, timestamps, routing data. This is ironclad proof of fraud." Next, Tyler examined the authorization documents. He studied the scanned copies that had been filed in court, analyzing them with software that detected digital manipulation. "These documents were created recently and backdated," he said. "I can see artifacts in the image files that indicate they were generated using graphics software, not scanned from physical originals. The signatures were probably traced using a digital pen tablet." For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. We had proof. Real, technical, indisputable proof that my parents had fabricated evidence. But I wasn't done investigating. I started digging into their business dealings, requesting public records, and searching online databases. My father owned a commercial real estate development company called Brennan Properties. My mother sat on the boards of 3 charitable foundations. The more I looked, the more suspicious patterns emerged. The foundations made large donations to my father's company for urban renewal projects. Millions of dollars flowing from nonprofit organizations into his business. But when I tried to find information about these projects, I found nothing. No completed buildings, no ribbon-cutting ceremonies, no press releases. I visited the sites listed in the donation records. Addresses in the Bronx and Queens where affordable housing developments were supposedly built. I found empty lots, abandoned buildings, overgrown fields, surrounded by chain-link fences. I talked to community members who lived near these sites. They'd been promised affordable housing that never materialized. They'd watched construction equipment arrive and then disappear. They'd seen nothing change except the signs that went up announcing projects that never happened. My parents had taken millions in foundation money, claimed it for fake development projects, and pocketed the cash. It was money laundering on a massive scale. I compiled everything: financial records, photographs, witness statements. I created a comprehensive dossier documenting years of fraud. This was bigger than stealing my inheritance. This was criminal conspiracy theft from charitable organizations, violations of nonprofit law. I took my evidence to the FBI's white-collar crime division in Manhattan. Special Agent Susan Morales reviewed my documentation for 2 hours, asking detailed questions, making notes. "This is compelling evidence," she said finally. "We'll open a preliminary investigation. If what you're showing me is accurate, your parents are facing serious federal charges." I left the FBI office feeling vindicated. Finally, someone with real power was taking me seriously. My parents had been so focused on discrediting me that they hadn't hidden their other crimes well enough. I'd found the thread that would unravel everything. That night I slept well for the first time in months. The next morning, I woke to pounding on my apartment door. Loud, aggressive pounding that made my heart race. I looked through the peephole and saw FBI agents and NYPD officers. I opened the door confused. "Can I help you?" They pushed past me into my apartment. One agent held up a badge and an arrest warrant. "Anya Hartley, you're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering." The room tilted. "What? No, you don't understand. I reported my parents for those crimes yesterday. We're aware of your accusations, but we have evidence that you're the one who stole from the foundations. You've been embezzling money for 3 years. They showed me documents. A bank account in my name at Chase Manhattan Bank. Wire transfers totaling $1,300,000 from the foundation accounts. The account had been opened 18 months ago, with regular deposits every month since then. I don't have that account. I've never seen it before, but they had proof. My social security number, identification documents with my signature. Security camera footage from the bank showing a woman who looked like me opening the account. Credit card statements showing purchases of designer clothes, jewelry, expensive electronics, hotel reservations in Miami, Los Angeles, Paris. I've never been to Paris. I've never left the country. They weren't listening. They read me my rights, handcuffed me, and led me out of my building while neighbors stared. The morning was bright and cold. I shivered in my thin t-shirt and sweatpants. At the federal detention center, they processed me like I was a criminal. Fingerprints, photographs, prisoner number. They took my clothes and gave me an orange jumpsuit. Everything moved with terrifying efficiency. The bail hearing was the next day. I stood before a federal judge who looked at me with cold disdain. The prosecutor argued that I was a flight risk. They'd found a fake passport in my apartment, allegedly showing I'd planned to flee the country. My supposed stolen money gave me resources to disappear. Bail was set at $500,000. I couldn't afford $500, let alone $500,000. I was remanded to custody pending trial. The federal detention center in Brooklyn was worse than the psychiatric facility. Concrete walls, constant noise, women who'd committed actual crimes surrounding me. I shared a cell with 3 other women. One was awaiting trial for armed robbery. Another had been caught trafficking drugs. The third, Diana, was a former accountant who'd gotten caught in a fraud scheme. Diana was the only one who talked to me like I was human. On the 3rd night after lights out, she whispered from her bunk across from mine, "You look like you don't belong here." I don't. I was framed. Everyone says that Diana said not unkindly. But some people really were framed. What happened? I told her everything. The trust fund, the inheritance, my parents' elaborate scheme to protect their theft. Now this fake bank account, the manufactured evidence making me look like an embezzler. Diana listened silently. When I finished, she said, "In white-collar cases, it's all about the paper trail. Follow the money backwards. There's always a mistake somewhere. Someone always gets sloppy. How do I follow anything from in here? You have people on the outside, right?" I thought of Emma and Tyler. Yes. Then use them. Have them trace that bank account. Find out where it really came from. In my experience, fake accounts always have a connection to the people who created them. Your parents had to fund that account somehow. Find the link. It was the first useful advice anyone had given me. The next morning, I called Emma from the jail phone. I explained about the fraudulent bank account, about needing to trace its origins and find any connection to my parents' financial network. "We're on it," Emma said. "Tyler and I will dig into everything. We'll find the connection." "Emma," my voice cracked, "thank you for not giving up on me." "Never," she said fiercely. "You're going to beat this, I promise." The call ended, and I went back to my cell. Trial was scheduled for 6 weeks away. 6 weeks of living in this place surrounded by concrete and despair. 6 weeks of wondering if I'd spend the next 15 to 20 years in federal prison for crimes I didn't commit. My court-appointed public defender was named Marcus Riley. He was an overworked attorney with 93 other cases. He visited me twice, both times for less than 30 minutes. He barely looked at my file. When I tried to explain that I'd been framed, that my parents had created all the evidence, he just nodded tiredly and said juries don't like conspiracy theories. I lay on my bunk at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of other inmates crying or arguing or pacing. This was rock bottom. I'd lost everything, except the tiny thread of hope that Emma and Tyler could find something, anything that would prove my innocence. If they couldn't, I would spend the best years of my life in prison while my parents kept my inheritance and lived free. The unfairness of it threatened to crush me. 6 weeks in federal detention changed me. I lost 15 pounds because the food was barely edible, and my stomach stayed constantly knotted with anxiety. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by nightmares or the sounds of other inmates. I stopped looking at myself in the scratched metal mirror bolted to the wall because the woman staring back looked hollow and defeated. Marcus Riley visited twice more, each time bringing nothing but pessimism. The evidence against me looked strong, he said. The prosecution had documentation, bank records, security footage. My defense that I'd been framed by my own parents sounded far-fetched. Juries wanted facts, not family drama. "How many of your 93 other clients do you actually believe?" I asked him during our last meeting. He looked at me with tired eyes. "It doesn't matter what I believe. It matters what I can prove. Then prove I'm innocent. I'm trying. But you need to prepare yourself for the possibility of conviction." He left and I went back to my cell feeling more alone than ever. But outside the detention center, Emma and Tyler were working. They called me every few days with updates. They'd traced the fraudulent bank account to its opening date. Tyler had hacked into the bank's security system, which was illegal, but he didn't care. He found the footage of the account being opened, a woman in a wig and sunglasses, who resembled me in height and build, but wasn't me. Emma studied the footage frame by frame. The woman's body language, the way she moved, something about her seemed familiar. Then Emma realized it was Claire. My sister had opened the account pretending to be me. They followed Claire's digital trail. Despite supposedly inheriting everything, Claire seemed financially stressed. Her BMW had been repossessed 2 weeks ago. The Manhattan townhouse had a second mortgage that appeared in public records. Claire worked as an associate at a consulting firm, making decent money but nowhere near enough to support the lifestyle she'd been accustomed to. Emma dug deeper into my parents' finances, pulling every public record she could find. The picture that emerged was shocking. Despite their wealth and success, they were drowning in debt. The real estate company was failing. Multiple properties were in foreclosure. Foundation money they'd stolen had already been spent. Then Tyler found something crucial. 6 months before I'd received the envelope at graduation, before I knew anything about the trust fund, the state attorney general had opened an investigation into the foundations where my mother served as board member. Irregularities in donations, missing funds, projects that existed only on paper. My parents knew they were being investigated. They knew their fraud was about to be exposed. They needed a scapegoat. They chose me. The fake bank account had been created as insurance. If their crimes were discovered, they'd blame everything on me. The troubled daughter, the one with mental health issues and financial struggles. They'd created the perfect fall guy. Emma and Tyler compiled everything. Bank security footage showing Claire financial records, proving my parents' debt, evidence of the state investigation that predated my knowledge of the trust. Timeline showing the frame-up was premeditated. They brought it all to Jenna Sutton, my original lawyer. Jenna looked at the evidence with growing excitement. "This changes everything. We can prove you were systematically framed. We can show motive, means, and opportunity." She filed an emergency motion with the trial judge, requesting a hearing to present newly discovered evidence. The judge, skeptical but intrigued by Jenna's filing, agreed to hear arguments. The hearing was scheduled for the next morning. I was brought from detention to the courtroom in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit. My parents sat in the gallery looking confident. They had no idea what was coming. Jenna began presenting the evidence. Tyler testified about the IP addresses and digital forensics. Emma showed the bank footage of Claire. An expert witness explained how the signature forgeries had been created. Jenna introduced the timeline, showing my parents had been under investigation before I knew about the trust. Then the courtroom doors opened. Harold Brennan walked in carrying boxes of documents. The lawyer who'd originally taken my case and then betrayed me. The lawyer I thought my parents had paid off. "Your Honor," he said, "I'm here to turn state's evidence against Douglas and Margaret Hartley." The courtroom went silent. My parents' faces drained of color. Brennan explained that they had approached him to pay him off, which he'd initially agreed to because the money was substantial. But his conscience had tortured him. He had a daughter my age. He couldn't live with himself, knowing he'd helped destroy an innocent woman. So he'd kept copies of everything. Every conversation. Every document they'd given him. Every admission they'd made. He'd been recording them. Brennan played audio recordings in the courtroom. My parents' voices clear and undeniable, discussing how to frame me. Talking about forging documents. Planning the psychiatric hold. Creating the fake bank account. They'd said everything believing Brennan was their ally. "We just need to make sure Anya looks crazy enough that nobody believes her," my mother's voice said on the recording. "The trust money is already spent. We can't give it back. We have to protect ourselves. Claire can testify against her if needed," my father said. "She'll say whatever we tell her to say. And if the state investigation gets too close, we blame everything on Anya. She's already the screw-up of the family. Everyone will believe she did it." The recordings went on, laying out their entire conspiracy. Brennan also provided documents, showing they'd created the fake account proof, they'd forged signatures. Evidence of their foundation fraud going back years. "Why come forward now?" the judge asked Brennan. "Because I couldn't let an innocent woman go to prison for crimes I know she didn't commit. I'm willing to accept the consequences for my initial involvement, but I won't stay silent while this miscarriage of justice proceeds." The federal prosecutor looked stunned. The judge called a recess and demanded to meet with all attorneys in his chambers. 2 hours later, we reconvened. The judge announced that all charges against me were dismissed. He issued arrest warrants for Douglas Hartley, Margaret Hartley, and Claire Hartley on charges of wire fraud, money laundering, forgery, obstruction of justice, making false statements to federal investigators, and conspiracy. Federal marshals were dispatched immediately to arrest them. I stood in the courtroom, barely able to process what was happening. The handcuffs were removed from my wrists. The orange jumpsuit would be exchanged for my own clothes. I was free. Emma was waiting outside the courthouse when they released me. She threw her arms around me, and we both cried. Jenna stood nearby, grinning. We did it. We actually did it. News crews surrounded us. The story had broken wealthy couple frames daughter for their own crimes. It was the kind of scandal that dominated headlines. My face was everywhere. Innocent woman freed after parents' frame job exposed. That evening, my parents and Claire were arrested at the Manhattan townhouse. I watched the news coverage from Emma's apartment where I was staying because I no longer had a home of my own. Seeing them in handcuffs being led away by federal agents should have felt satisfying. Instead, I just felt empty and tired. But one problem remained. The trust money was still gone. $31 million spent over 24 years. My parents were broke, their assets mortgaged and foreclosed. Even if I won, even if they went to prison, I would never see that money again. Justice without restitution felt hollow. I stood at Emma's window, looking out at the Brooklyn skyline, wondering what came next. I was free, but I had nothing. No job, no home, no savings, no inheritance. Still, I was alive. I wasn't in prison. And my parents would finally face consequences for what they'd done. It would have to be enough. The criminal trial began 3 months later. It was heavily publicized, one of those cases that captured public attention because it had everything: wealth betrayal, family drama, and a sympathetic victim who'd nearly been destroyed by the people who should have protected her. I testified on the first day, telling the complete story from beginning to end. The jury listened with visible shock as I described. Growing up being called the dumb one, finding out about my inheritance, watching my parents systematically try to destroy me. Harold Brennan testified next, providing the devastating audio recordings and documents. Tyler explained the digital forensics. Emma showed the security footage of Claire pretending to be me. Witness after witness corroborated different parts of the prosecution's case. My parents' defense attorney tried to paint them as loving parents who'd made mistakes. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. Guilty, on all counts. At sentencing 2 weeks later, Judge Castellano, the same judge who'd originally ruled against me, looked at my parents with unconcealed disgust. You betrayed every duty a parent has to a child. You stole from her. You gaslit her. You tried to have her institutionalized. And when all that failed, you attempted to send her to federal prison for your own crimes. I've never seen such calculated cruelty from people who claim to love someone. Douglas received 18 years in federal prison. Margaret received 15 years. Claire, who'd been an accessory but not the mastermind, received 8 years. Before they were led away, the judge allowed me to give a victim impact statement. I stood at the podium and looked at the 3 people who'd made my life miserable for 30 years. You told me I was stupid, I said, my voice steady. You told me I'd never amount to anything. You made me believe I was worthless. But the truth is, you were the ones who were worthless. You stole from me not just money, but years of confidence and peace. You tried to destroy me because you were terrified I'd discover who I really was. Marcus Hartley's daughter. A person with value and potential you could never see, because you were too busy seeing your own greed. My mother started crying. My father stared at me with hatred. Claire just looked away. I forgive you, I continued, not because you deserve it, but because holding on to anger would let you continue controlling my life. You don't get that power anymore. You're going to prison, and I'm going to live the life I was always meant to have. They were led away in handcuffs. I never saw them again. The civil proceedings happened simultaneously. I filed suit, seeking recovery of the stolen inheritance plus damages. My parents had no money, but the court ordered the sale of all remaining assets. The Manhattan townhouse, despite its mortgages, sold for $12 million. Other assets, art and jewelry they hadn't yet sold, were liquidated. Claire's salary was garnished for restitution. Then forensic accountants made a discovery. Douglas had secret offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, hidden even from Margaret. He'd been squirreling away money for years, preparing for the day his frauds were discovered. The accounts contained $18 million. The court seized the accounts and awarded the money to me as restitution. Foundation insurance policies paid out an additional $8 million for the fraud claims. Other assets were sold: cars, furniture, investments that hadn't been liquidated yet. In total, I recovered $39 million, nearly the full original trust amount adjusted for inflation. But I didn't want a mansion or a luxury lifestyle. Those things reminded me of my parents' corruption. Instead, I moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn with large windows and hardwood floors. It was mine, paid for with cash, and it felt like a palace. I used the recovered money to establish a foundation in Marcus Hartley's name, the biological father I barely remembered, but who'd tried to give me a better life. The Marcus Hartley Foundation provided scholarships to students from difficult family situations, kids who'd been told they weren't good enough, that they'd never succeed. I called it the Dumb One Scholarship. I owned the label that had hurt me and transformed it into something that helped others. I went back to school, enrolling in an MBA program. Turns out I wasn't dumb at all. I was actually brilliant at finance and business. My parents' mockery had been projection of their own inadequacy. They'd needed to make me small to feel big. I discovered I loved numbers, loved analyzing markets and building strategies. I graduated at the top of my class. I reconnected with my therapist and worked through the trauma. Learned that healing wasn't linear, that some days I'd feel strong and other days the old wounds would ache. But slowly, month by month, I rebuilt myself. Emma, Tyler, Jenna, and even Harold Brennan became my real family. We celebrated holidays together, supported each other through challenges, built the kind of relationships based on choice rather than obligation. I established firm boundaries. No contact with my parents or Claire. They sent letters from prison occasionally. My mother's full of self-pity and requests for money, my father's still angry and blaming. I returned them unopened. They'd taken enough of my energy. They wouldn't get any more. I started dating again slowly and carefully. Learning to trust wasn't easy after what I'd been through. But I met someone kind, a teacher named David, who thought I was brilliant and never made me feel small. We took things slow, building something real. 3 years after the envelope changed my life, I became an advocate for financial abuse victims. I spoke publicly about my experience helping others navigate similar situations. I wrote a book called The Envelope That Changed Everything, telling my full story. It became a bestseller, not because people wanted scandal, but because it gave hope to anyone who'd ever been made to feel worthless by their own family. The Marcus Hartley Foundation grew. We gave out scholarships to 200 students a year. Kids from broken homes, abusive situations, families that didn't value education. I met each scholarship recipient personally, looked them in the eyes, and told them they were worthy of success, regardless of what anyone else said. 5 years after receiving the envelope, I stood at a podium, giving a commencement speech at a small liberal arts college upstate. I was 35 years old, confident, successful, and genuinely happy in ways I'd never imagined possible. I looked out at the graduating students, many of them first-generation college students, many from difficult backgrounds, and I spoke from the heart. Some of you were told you're not good enough. Some of you were mocked, dismissed, written off. I was too. My own parents called me the dumb one while giving my sister everything. They stole my inheritance and tried to destroy me when I fought back. But your worth isn't determined by people who can't see it. Sometimes the greatest gift is being underestimated. It gives you something to prove, and you prove it to yourself, not them. You don't need anyone's permission to be successful. You just need to refuse to believe their lies about who you are. The applause was thunderous. Students and parents stood, many crying, many nodding in recognition of their own struggles. After the speech, a young woman approached me, tears streaming down her face. She'd received one of my scholarships after her parents disowned her for choosing college over the family business. My parents said I'd never amount to anything, she whispered. You proved that wrong. I hugged her tightly. No, you proved that wrong. I just helped you see what was already there. Driving home that evening in my modest Honda, I thought about the stranger who'd given me the envelope at Claire's graduation. I never learned who he was. Likely an attorney or friend of Marcus Hartley who'd waited until I turned 30 to fulfill a promise made decades ago. That envelope hadn't just contained legal documents. It had contained permission to believe in myself, to demand better, to fight for what was mine. The real inheritance wasn't $47 million. It was discovering I deserved better than how I'd been treated my entire life. I pulled up to my apartment building and saw David waiting on the steps with takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant. He smiled when he saw me, that genuine smile of someone who valued me for exactly who I was. This was what family looked like. Not DNA or money or obligation, but people who saw your worth and reflected it back to you. People who chose to be in your life because they wanted to be there, not because they had to be. I finally saw my own worth too. My parents were wrong about me. They'd always been wrong. I wasn't the dumb one. I was smart, capable, resilient, and strong. It had just taken 30 years and a manila envelope to realize it. Sometimes the people who should love you most are incapable of real love. But you can build your own family, define your own worth, create your own life. You don't need their approval or recognition. You never did. The greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming so undeniably successful, so genuinely happy, that their opinion becomes completely irrelevant. I was free. Not because they were in prison, but because I'd stopped believing their lies about who I was, and that freedom was worth more than any inheritance could ever be. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who should have believed in you? How did you prove them wrong? Share your story in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories of resilience and triumph. and share this video with anyone who needs to hear that their worth isn't defined by people who refuse to see it. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it reminded you that you're stronger than you know, and you deserve so much better than anyone who makes you feel small. Stay strong, believe in yourself, and never let anyone convince you that you're less than you are. You've got this.